To facilitate the public comment, we will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer feature. Upon the request of the chair committee, when there's the point in the agenda that public comment is appropriate, public comment will be requested. At that point and at the direction of the committee chair, I will turn on and announce the Q&A feature. Members of the public can indicate they would like to make a comment by clicking on the icon with a question mark, which is located in a square at the bottom center of their WebEx screen. In the Ask field, typically in the lower right of the WebEx screen, members of the public who wish to make a public comment will type, "I would like to make a public comment," and send it to all panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to. It is not necessary to identify yourself in order to make a public comment. I will be taking the comments in the order that they are received. I will call on the individual's display name and indicate when their microphone has been unmuted. So please note that the Q&A feature is being used only as a means for the members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. Once unmuted, the member of the public may verbally state their comments. This is not a means to ask questions of the moderator. Such inquiries submitted using this feature will not be answered. If any attendees utilize a profane name, display name, or language during their public comment, we will simply mute their microphone and ask them to log back in with a professional display name. While you are free to express criticism or negative views, for the sake of the members of the public participating on the call, please do not use profane language when making public comments. I do have on the screen for reference the instructions on how to participate in the public comment time. We will be referencing this screen each time we open it up for public comment, and I will be providing a more brief instruction. So at this time, I will turn it back to the board for their committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. This is Seiran Fu, Chair of the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee. We will hold just for another minute or so to confirm that we have all the attendees from the committee here and that their microphones are working. So please give us another couple more minutes just to confirm that the technology is working, and we thank you for your patience, and we'll be starting shortly.
Moderator, confirming my microphone is working.
Thank you, Stephen Phillips.
All right, thank you. This is Siran Fu, and chair of this committee. Thank you, moderator. Thank you, Dr. Phillips. With that, I'm going to ask Mr. Glasspiegel to please call the roll to establish quorum and to call this meeting to order.
There you go. Sorry about that. Dr. Kasuga, can you hear me?
She's present.
There we go. Who?
Here.
Phillips.
Here.
Everyone's here.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. The quorum having been established, I would like to welcome everybody to the June 12th committee meeting of the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee of the Board of Psychology. The goal of this committee is to advocate for legislation and develop regulations that provide for the protection of consumer health and safety. The committee reviews, monitors, and recommends positions on legislation that affects the board, consumers, and the profession of psychology. The committee also recommends regulatory changes and informs the board about the status of regulatory packages. I want to start off by thanking the board staff for their adaptation to this new way of meeting. And over the last few months, they have been incredible partners in adapting to this new situation and making sure that all stakeholders can participate with the various technologies we have available. I would also like to thank today our moderator and their colleagues at Solid Training at the Department of Consumer Affairs for facilitating today's technology and for moderating the public comments section as we adapt to this new way of being and doing with how we conduct our meetings. Finally, I would like to add that we welcome public comments on any item on the agenda, and it is the board's intent to ask for public comments prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. If there are several members of the public seeking to comment on a particular agenda item, I will set a time limit on each speaker to ensure maximum participation by all in the context of a busy agenda. And so we will look to those persons asking to make comments and decide accordingly how to proceed in those moments. And with that, I would like to ask if there's any public comments on the welcome and opening remarks. And I do want to add that our next item will include public comment for items not on the agenda, and the public comment should pertain to each agenda item. So with that said, are there any public comments related to the chairperson's welcome and opening remarks?
This is the moderator at the direction of the committee chair. I have opened the Q&A feature. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment, simply click on the icon with the question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen. I am sharing the instructions on the screen for your reference. In the Ask field, type in, I would like to make a public comment, and send it to all the panelists. Any other communication will not be responded to. I will pause for a moment to give the public time to access the Q&A if they're interested in submitting a public comment request. Committee Chair, there has been no request for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please, and we will continue forward with the next agenda item.
Thank you. It has been closed.
So our next agenda item is for public comment for items not on the agenda. I want to note that the committee may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section. except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting, per Government Code Sections 11.125 and 11.125.7a. With that, Madam Moderator, could you please open the public comment Q&A tool?
Yes, this is the moderator at the request. I've opened the Q&A feature. Again, I do have the instructions on the screen for your reference. And if you would like to make a public comment, type in, I would like to make a public comment or a comment, and I will call on you. I will pause for a moment for the public to have time to access the Q&A feature and submit the request. So I have an individual identified as Victor Pacheco who has requested public comment. Victor, I will be unmuting your microphone at this moment. You have been unmuted.
Hello, thank you. I have a couple of things. I'm trying to find the agenda. Perhaps you could refer that to me, where that is. And secondly, when I reviewed the agenda a few weeks ago when this first came out, I noticed that AB 2253 was not an agenda item. So I'm wondering if that will be considered today, and if not, at some point in the future. Thank you.
This is the moderator, committee chair. There has been no further requests for public comments. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, Madam Moderator, please do.
It has been closed.
With regard to items on the agenda, if an item is not listed in the agenda section, we're unfortunately unable to discuss that item based on the rules set before us. But we appreciate the public comment and we'll take it under consideration. I also will want to highlight that the board did receive public comment sent in via email as well. And I direct the public and the board's attention to the public comments submitted to us via email so that those can be reviewed. And again, because of the rules pertaining to the public comments for items not on the agenda, we're unable to discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section, but we will review those and take those into consideration for future consideration for an item.
Mr. Chair, this is Noreen Marks, but I think the gentleman also asked about where to locate the agenda. I think that's appropriate question to ask, and you can give directions on where to locate the agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Marks. I apologize, Mr. or Dr. Pacheco, about not answering your first question. The agenda is available on the Board of Psychology's website at psychology.ca.gov. Upon entering the page for psychology.ca.gov, under the quick hit section, which is under the image of Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez, you will see a link that says board meetings under quick hits. Once you click that link, and a 2020 board meeting event calendar will appear. Under the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee, you will find the agenda and materials available for access there. And so that is available again on the psychology.ca.gov website by clicking board meetings under quick hits, which is under the image of Secretary Castro Ramirez. Thank you, Ms. Marks, for reminding me about that first question. As a reminder, also for board members and board staff, we will use the raise hands feature for tracking committee discussion. The raised hands feature is available on your WebEx platform on the bottom right-hand corner. And feel free to click that there. And staff has also brought to my attention that I misspoke, and AB 2253 is on the agenda as item 7C8, as C13. AB 2253 low professional licensure, and that is under the review of watch bills, and it will be brought up during discussion at that time. So I apologize for overlooking that item on the agenda. And thank you to Mr. Glasspiegel for raising that item.
Mr. Fu, I'm looking at my screen. I do not see the hand raising feature on my screen.
Okay, in that case, Dr. Phillips, we'll just use our voices and chime in when we want to say something, since that feature isn't on your screen. So apologies for that, Dr. Phillips.
Thank you very much.
And
Is there oh, sorry.
I apologize. This is the moderator. Apologize for interrupting there. But I did want to remind the members of the public that the hand raising, or inform them, I haven't informed them yet, that the hand raising feature will be reserved for the committee members and board staff to facilitate their discussion, either unmuting or raising your hand, whatever works best for you, board staff and board committee members. For the members of the public, that feature we will be, again, reserving for the board, but we do ask you to participate during the public comment, where we will open the Q&A feature for you to be able to communicate with the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Seeing no further board, or hearing actually no further board or staff discussion on the public comment section, I will turn to Executive Officer Sorek for the COVID-19 update. Ms. Sorek?
Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. The board will be, for the foreseeable months, have on its board and committee agendas a COVID update. In this COVID update, we'll be providing any updates on waivers or other issues that are applicable to the board. Included in the meeting materials as the latest DCA activities and updates. And then also included in the meeting materials is a list of the current waiver requests that the board has submitted. And the only update to that is the denial of the 2946 2912 temporary practice provisions, which would have allowed practice to go from 30 days during this emergency to a temporary 6-month provision. And the justification for the denial of that waiver was that EMSA already has a process in place by which out-of-state individuals can apply to practice in California through that agency, through the health corps. So that's the only update for the waivers, and I'm available for any questions.
Ms. Sorek, this is Dr. Phillips. I was just wondering what EMSA stands for everyone's benefit.
Sure. It's the Emergency Medical Services Authority.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Kasuga, I see you have your hand up.
Ms. Sorek, I just wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the process on how the waiver approval process, so the public and the committee members will be familiarized with how the waiver process happens.
Sure. The waiver process is such that when it started, it was driven by inquiries from the public and from licensees, challenges that were coming up during the COVID emergency. So board staff worked with legal counsel to submit waiver requests to temporarily suspend or modify statutes and regulations that are in place that oversee the practice of psychology. The process by which you submit a waiver is there's a form that's submitted to the Department of Consumer Affairs. That form is reviewed by Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, as well as the Governor's Office. And then the director of the department has the final approval authority for that. And that was given by authority in an executive order provided by the governor of the state of California. So that is how the waiver process works. And some of the waivers have been submitted by the department on behalf of many programs. For example, continuing education, requirements were extended for 6 months to give people opportunities to be able to meet renewal requirements during the emergency situation. So there have been some of those that are department-wide. And then outside organizations can also request a waiver through the Department of Consumer Affairs. We have seen one group of mental health organizations that did submit a waiver to the department, and that's included in the waiver update. That request was denied, and I believe that was to waive fingerprint and exams for individuals during this time.
Thank you, and I appreciate that clarification.
Sure. And just to kind of add to that, the justification for the denial of that was a consumer protection concern. And for those on the line that may not be aware, the number one charge of the Department of Consumer Affairs is consumer protection mandate. And whenever there are policies that programs are looking to review, they must consider it in the lens of consumer protection first.
Thank you, Dr. Kasuga and Ms. Sorick. Ms. Sorick, a quick question for you. A lot of the materials I've seen has been related to the number of respondents to the California Health Corps. And I believe it was Dr. Jolinda Crow at our last teleconference board meeting who asked if there was a breakdown of psychologists who have volunteered for the Health Corps. Do we have a breakdown of those numbers? Are you able to provide us an update on that?
Yes, I just got that yesterday from the Department of Consumer Affairs, and without going into the spreadsheet, there were roughly 1,100 individuals that had applied for the Health Corps that were psychologists.
Thank you, Ms. Sorick. That's really helpful. If there's no further board discussion, Madam Moderator, could you open the public comment section for this item, please?
Yes, this is the moderator. I will open the Q&A. It has been open. Again, if you would like to make a public comment, please click on the icon with a question mark within a square located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen. I am sharing the instructions on the screen for your reference. In the Ask field, type, I would like to make a public comment, and send it to all panelists. Any other communication will not be responded to. I will pause for a moment to give public members the time to access the Q&A feature. Committee Chair, there's been no request for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Madam Moderator, if you can just hold it open just for another quick 30 seconds or so, because I know we've received comments in the past about this item, and I just want to make sure that if folks are having tech issues, that they're able to enter. I would like to make a comment into that, and I'll give it another few seconds or so that folks can have a chance.
Thank you.
It's been a recurring question from folks, so we want to make sure we provide a little bit more time.
Thank you. Will do.
All right, not seeing any public comment. Madam Moderator, could you please close the Q&A feature?
Yes, and I saw a comment came in, and it was more of just the comments. Thank you. Okay, I will close the Q&A feature at this moment.
Thank you. Ms. Sorg, just reflecting on the materials you sent us for agenda item 4, could you share with us how the EPPP and the Complete are a part of our suite of consumer protection measures?
Absolutely. So for those of you on the line, the examination for professional practice of psychology. Sorry, I was blanking on the full name, but we don't want to use acronyms. So that is the national examination. That provides the minimum competency for practice in the state of California. The Complete is the California Professional Law and Ethics Examination, and that's our jurisprudence exam, which ensures that individuals are aware and up to date on the laws and ethics pertaining to the profession. Again, these are the minimum competencies that the legislature wants to see for the professionals that are licensed in the state to provide services. As I mentioned earlier, and we have been asked about waiving that requirement right now during this emergency, and the department director has stated that that is a consumer protection issue that at this time will not be waived. So just an update on that.
Thank you, Ms. Sorg. That's really helpful. Dr. Kasuga?
I just want to ask Ms. Sorg, if there are stakeholders that are invested in the approval of these waivers and want to provide additional support for the waiver request, is there a process in which they can submit those?
I can inquire about that. I'm sure if there's a contact made to the Department of Consumer Affairs through the perhaps executive office, that anyone can kind of plead their case if they believe that something should be reconsidered for a waiver. But it is really at the discretion of the director of the Department of Consumer Affairs, so I would recommend reaching out to the director's office if individuals would like to provide additional justifications.
Ms. Sorg.
Oh, did you hear that part, or was I muted?
I think we heard that part.
Okay, just making sure.
Is there additional committee discussion on this item? All right, seeing no additional committee discussion, we will move on to item number 5. Item 5 is the discussion and potential approval of our meeting minutes. You will find a draft in the agenda items. Is there discussion on this item from the committee?
This is Dr. Kasuga, and I don't have anything. Thank you.
Hi, this is Dr. Phillips. I did have a couple of minor comments, if you'll allow me a second to scroll to them. Line 35 says Dr. Phillips requested, and the R is capitalized. I think that should be lowercase. Let's see if there's any, I think there was something else too. On line 274, actually, let's start on line 273. Mrs. Burns advised the need to discuss item E. She advised on page 13 of the language, staff edit K1. This language advises the need to hold the CPD items for, I would think, a specified number of years. And I think it should be the language advises of the need to hold the CPD items for a specified number of years, in the spirit of Dr. Horn. And that's it.
This is Noreen Marks, and I just want to point out my name is misspelled on line 17.
All right. This is Seiran here. So if there are no issues with the edits by Dr. Phillips and Ms. Marks, do I have a motion from the committee to adopt the committee meetings as amended?
So moved.
I second.
It's been moved by Dr. Phillips and seconded by Dr. Kasuga. Is there, Madam Moderator, could you open the public comment Q&A box for this, please?
Yes. The Q&A has now been opened. And again, if you would like to make a public comment, click on the icon with the question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. In the Ask field type, I would like to make a public comment and send it to all panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to. I'll pause for a moment to allow public to able to access the Q&A feature. This is the moderator. I did receive a request. However, it was for item number 4. How would you like me to proceed, legal counsel or committee chair?
Madam Moderator, this is Seiran Fu, the committee chair. Please go ahead and so we can hear the item. I know we're all working with this new technology, and so I want to make sure that for folks who may have missed an opportunity on commenting on item 4, that they have the opportunity to do so.
Thank you. So, individual identified as Victor Pacheco, I will be unmuting your microphone at this moment. You have been unmuted.
Mr. Chair, the only thing I would suggest is to finish up the item that we're discussing now so that you don't have that left open before returning to the prior item. It's just a suggestion.
That is a very helpful suggestion. So what I'm going to do then, based on that recommendation, is we will return to, I'm not sure if it's Mr. or Dr. Pacheco, but for the public comment on item 4. But before doing that, is there additional public comment on the item before us, which is the meetings? And I'll ask for you to write that I would like to make a comment section. If you do. All right, seeing no public comment on the discussion of the meeting minutes, I'm going to ask that Mr. Glasspiegel will call the roll for the, call the roll for the adoption of the motion that Dr. Phillips has put before us at hand, and then we'll return to some of these public comments. Mr. Glasspiegel, could you please call the roll for the motion before us to adopt the meeting minutes as amended by Dr. Phillips?
Yes. Kasuga?
Aye.
Fu?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you so much. And so with item 5 dispensed with, I would like to return to item 4 to ensure that the public comments that we see before us and who may have had difficulty accessing the app to go ahead and make their public comments. Madam Moderator, I see 2 public comments here, and I turn it over to you to make available their lines. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So at this moment, I will be unmuting Victor Pacheco's line for him to comment on item number 4. Victor, you have been unmuted.
Thank you. I'm a psychologist for the prison system, California Medical Facility specifically, and I'm also representing 1,500 psychologists through AFSCME 2620, a union which in part represents 1,500 psychologists. We have a lot of psychologists who are unlicensed and need to take the licensing exam within a specified period of time. And during the last few months, during the COVID crisis, testing centers had to be closed, understandably, and everything got shut down. But within the state system, there is a hard 4 years that you have to get your license. And, they work us pretty hard, so it's tough to get home and study, but, for public interest, that has to happen. But when you're up against that 4-year clock and you can't get a testing date, or the testing date, I think, goes by lottery, it seems like there needs to be a pause or a delay or something for that small group of people who will lose their jobs over not being able to take the test. Between the 2 tests, there's a delay. It's not like one can take a test real quick. So if you take and pass the first test, the delay for the second test is another feature. So anyway, I don't know if this is the place to address that. Maybe that'll come up later. But when I heard about COVID waivers and how it wasn't allowed for the public interest, I understand that. But there are a number of people who are directly impacted by that. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Sorry.
Go ahead. I apologize.
I was just going to thank Dr. Pacheco for his comments. Go ahead, Madam Moderator. Apologies.
Go ahead. Sorry. If you would like to respond or comment on that, please move forward.
I'm not seeing any staff responses to that, but I will ask the question of Ms. Sorick. The waivers that we've submitted have been related to the entire licensee population, and not for a particular segment that may have a agreement with a different state agency. Is that correct? And it would be the responsibility of that state agency who sets those requirements to undergo their own process outside of DCA. Is that accurate, Ms. Sorick?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Fu, and I wanted to ask Ms. Marks, since she's on the line, about the role of the licensure committee and if there are requests for extension of time for individuals working in exempt settings where they might be coming up to the 5-year mark. That's not something we have seen because a lot of the individuals have not been impacted by that legislative change as of yet, but I can see if this emergency continues to go on and if there are limited opportunities for individuals to take the exam, is there an opportunity for the licensure committee to grant additional time for individuals to take that exam, barring an overall waiver, but is that another option? Is that something you can speak to, Ms. Marks?
If I understand your question correctly, is whether or not there is an extension of time for taking the exam.
Correct.
That the licensure committee reviews.
Correct. So if an individual is coming up on their 4-year mark or 4.5-year mark that they've been working in an exempt setting, the limit is 5 years. If they're unable to get scheduled to take the exam, is there a request that that individual can submit to the board and that the licensure committee could consider? Is that something the licensure committee could review? I know we look at 30-month and 72-month extensions. Is that something they could also consider?
Let me take a quick look at the code and regs to see. But my question would be whether or not that 4 or 5-year limitation is within the psychology licensing law or within another code section like welfare and institutions or health and safety, because whether or not the board could extend time to take the exam may not impact the limitation that's set out in a different code section over which we have no jurisdictions, not within our licensing law. But I will take a look at that. If the commenter could help out potentially with giving us a code section where the time limitation is included, I might help too.
Madam Moderator, would it be possible for you to unmute Dr. Pacheco's line just in case he is able to share the code section with Ms. Marks?
Yes, I will be unmuting his microphone at this moment.
I believe it's section 5068 point something. I'm not sure which code it's in, but that's where it spells out the 4-year time period for exempt settings and a 5th-year extension under catastrophic circumstances. It's also perhaps part of AB 2253, which will be discussed later. And you know, one thing in trying to figure out which jurisdiction we're talking about, one thing has to do with the board's 4-year period, but another has to do with an exempt settings responsibility to maintain that 4 years come hell or high water. The board may give a waiver, but that doesn't remove the responsibility of the state to count 4 or 5 years in absolute terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pacheco. And Ms. Marks, it's Penal Code section 5068.5. 5068.5. So while Ms. Marks takes a look at that code section, I would like just to remind our attendees that if you do have a public comment, that you to please type in, I would like to make a comment in the ask field on the lower right end of your screen. Any submission other than that, we won't be able to unmute your line. I mean, we'll certainly see your comments, but if you want to make a verbal comment, we are asking that you type in, I would like to make a comment in the ask field in the lower right hand of your screen if you're looking to make a public comment. So that our moderator can go ahead and unmute your line when that occurs.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I had not realized I had muted myself. I was saying that I don't believe the code section that the commenter referred to is within the psychology licensing law, if it's within the penal code. So the board would not have any authority to waive that in any way. Now, whether or not there's a particular section that requires that the exam be taken within a particular period of time, the board may have jurisdiction over that. And I'm looking to see whether or not there are restrictions or limitations on the time in which somebody can take the exam. So I'll look at that. But if it's a penal code section, the board would not have any jurisdiction over that and could not request a waiver of it. Certainly not request the director of the DCA to waive that, but I'm looking for restrictions on or limitations on when the exam can be taken.
Thank you, Ms. Marks. So I'm going to continue in the public comment section here. My understanding is that Dr. O'Brien would like to make a comment. Madam Moderator, could you please unmute Dr. O'Brien's line?
Yes. Dr. O'Brien, your microphone has been unmuted.
Yes, good morning. I already typed out my comment, but I'd like to basically just say it, which is I understand that it's important to recognize and acknowledge that we are protecting the consumer in terms of not waiving the examinations. I would just like to say that after going to college and getting a doctorate for 16 years and having 3 years over 3,000 hours, I want to say years, 3,000 hours of experience and training, that this is basically the last hurdle that we have in terms of becoming licensed. And it's my understanding that we already have an extension as psychological assistants in order to take the examination, but kind of piggybacking on the original comment from the other doctor in terms of going to the examination and signing up for it and having a lottery, all sorts of issues in terms of trying to get this examination done in a quicker manner in order to be licensed and to take care of the people dealing with the COVID-19. It's my understanding that suicide rate, domestic violence, anxiety, all sorts of very highly important issues with our consumers, that it would be in the best interest of the consumers, in my opinion, to waive the examinations during this important and unprecedented time. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. I don't see additional public comment in the Q&A panel, so I'm going to go ahead and ask Madam Moderator to go ahead and close that out, and we will return to item 6A, or item 6, I should say, and beginning with item 6A. Though I note that we did jump around a little bit, so I just want to make sure I go back to our committee members. If our committee members have additional discussion on what we've just heard.
Yeah, this is Dr. Phillips, and maybe you can clarify this for us, Ms. Sorick. But if I understood the grid correctly of the COVID waivers, there was a waiver submitted by, not by the Board of Psychology, but by another agency that requested the waiver of the licensing examinations, and that was not granted by the Department of Consumer Affairs. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So it sounds like that issue, at least from the point of view of the Department of Consumer Affairs, is closed. I certainly understand the logic wanting a waiver under those circumstances, but we also have an obligation to consumers in the state of California to make sure people have met all the requirements of a license to the best extent possible. Make sure that people are qualified to have a psychology license. And while Dr. O'Brien, I'm sure, has wonderful qualifications, the licensing exam is a precursor to receiving your license. So, in the interest of consumer affairs. So I thought I would just clarify that there has been an attempt to achieve that type of waiver that Dr. O'Brien suggested, but it was unsuccessful.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips, for that insight. Is there additional public comment? Oh, excuse me, not public comment, committee discussion.
Mr. Chair, this is, oh, I'm sorry, is that Dr. Kusuga?
I want to say that I don't have additional comment. Thank you.
Oh, okay. The only limitation that I can find, a restriction on taking the exam, is found in section 1381.4 of the regulations that requires the person to take or retake the licensing exam in the 12-month period after applying to take it. But I don't think that's what the commenter was referring to. So, perhaps the commenter can contact staff outside of this to see if there's any other code sections that he thinks might be applicable, because the one code section that he mentioned in the penal code is not within the board's licensing law. And I don't think he's talking about not being able to take the exam within a year after the application. So I don't think that's what we're talking about.
Thank you, Ms. Marks, for that clarification. So seeing no additional board committee discussion, I'm going to move to item 6A. I'm also going to note that the committee will take a 5-minute break at 11 a.m. Just for a quick 5 minutes. So the item 6 is board-sponsored legislation, and item A is related to our sunset bill. I'm going to actually ask Mr. Glasspiegel if you could provide us a brief update on the legislature's updated calendar in light of this unprecedented long spring recess that we had and shorter summer recess that we're about to embark upon, and how that's affected the build and priority for the legislature to have committee hearings. So, Mr. Glasspiegel, could you provide us an overview of where we are and also an update on then the sunset bill?
Absolutely. Excuse me. Due to COVID-19, the legislature, they recessed for an extended period of time during an unplanned recess. So what that caused was a decrease in the amount of time the legislature had to pass legislation. So to do as much as possible, they had to drastically decrease their bill load. And I actually don't know the amount that they were able to hold, but it was quite a reduced amount. and the time frames were expedited. So they have not a whole lot of time to move the bills now that we've jumped forward, at least a month or two. So two of our sunset bill was affected, and our current bill, which is A and B. But A was the requested amendments that we were hoping to make within sunset. Those aren't being considered this year, and later you'll see a bill that the board is the staff is requesting the board take a position on, so that we can support our 1-year advancement in sunset, which is what all boards that were supposed to go through sunset this year are getting a 1-year extension to go through the process next year. So agenda item 6A is all the requested amendments that we wanted to make in our sunset bill, and that is not being taken up this legislative year. In addition, if it's okay, I can mention 6B, which was Pan's bill, but that was the disciplinary action regarding sexual contact or sexual behavior with a client or former client. That bill is not being pursued either due to the need to reduce the bill load.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. Is there any committee discussion on the items that Mr. Glasspiegel just covered?
This is Dr. Phillips. Excuse me. I wanted to clarify with Mr. Glasspiegel, and maybe he can answer this definitively. Is it staff's intention to seek sponsor in succeeding legislative years as to the sexual behavior language in order to continue to move forward on that bill?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Right. Seeing no further committee discussion, Madam Moderator, could you open up our Q&A panel for any public comment on items 6A and B, please?
Yeah, this is the moderator. I've opened up the Q&A panel. Again, members of the public, if you would like to make a public comment, please click on the icon with a question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen. I am sharing the instructions on the screen for your reference. In the Ask field, type, I would like to make a public comment, and submit it to all panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to. I will now pause a moment to allow the members of the public time to access the Q&A feature.
Madam Moderator, I do see a comment from Dr. O'Brien.
Yes, I will be unmuting Dr. O'Brien at this moment. You have been unmuted.
Hello, just very quickly, I just wanted to respond to Dr. Phillips mentioning that the other agencies asked for the exam waiver. And just that last week came out that the Board of Behavioral Sciences for master's level professionals did actually do the exam waiver for the California Law and Ethics exam.
Thank you, Dr. O'Brien. We ask that the comments be pertaining to the agenda item before us, but we appreciate you sharing that comment. Do you have a comment on the items 6A and B?
Oh, I apologize. On my screen, it showed licensing pathways, and I did have some issues with hearing some of the commenters, so I apologize for that.
No worries. This is for items 6A and B related to board-sponsored legislation, the pathway selection for statutory revisions, and for the amendments to the BMP code regarding denial, suspension, and revocation for acts of sexual contact.
Oh, I understand. My apologies. It's at the wrong time.
No worries. All right. Is there additional public comment for items 6A or B?
This is the moderator. I haven't received any further requests. I would like to point out that you are able to move along the PowerPoint from your end, so that will change the display than what everyone else has. From time to time, we will try to force that PowerPoint slide to go back to the one that we're currently looking at, but just as a reminder, you are able to flip through those PowerPoints yourself. But no, Committee Chair, no further requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you.
And the hour being 11, we will go ahead and take our 5-minute break. So I ask that folks voluntarily mute their lines so that we don't hear you make coffee. And we will return at 11:07 and to resume our committee meeting. Thank you very much. We will take a 5-minute break. meeting and take up item 7, A1. This is related to Assembly Bill 1145 by Assemblywomen Garcia and Christina. Mr. Glasspiegel, turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. This bill would have provided treatment for equal treatment of consenting minors under the law, regardless of the type of consensual sexual activities they engage in, and provides clarity on the requirements of mandatory reporters under CANRA in these specified situations. The board took a support position of AB 1145 at the April 24th, 26th, 2019 board meeting. This bill has not moved since January 28, 2020 because of the COVID pandemic, and the bill is sitting as is for the time being. And this is informational purposes only.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. Is there any committee discussion on this bill? All right, seeing no committee discussion, Madam Moderator, could you open the public comment section, please?
This is the moderator. Public comment feature has been, or Q&A feature has been opened. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment, the instructions are on the screen. Simply click on the icon with the question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen and type in, "I would like to make a public comment" in the Ask field and send it to all of the panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to. I'll be pausing for a moment to give public the ability to access the Q&A feature and submit their requests. Committee Chair, we haven't received any requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
It has been closed. Thank you.
All right, we now turn to item 7A2, Senate Bill 53 by Senator Wilk. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. SB 53 would modify the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act to require 2-member advisory committees of a state body to hold open public meetings if at least one member of the advisory committee is a member of a larger state body and the advisory committee is supported in whole or in part by funds provided by the state body. At the April 24, 26, 2019 meeting, the board took an opposed position on SB 53, and as of July of 2019, it's been in the Assembly Committee on Appropriations, and as of August 30th of 2019, the bill was held under submission. So it's looking like it's not going to move anywhere.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. Is there committee discussion on this bill? All right, seeing no committee discussion, is there any, Madam Moderator, could you please open the Q&A section for public comment, please?
The Q&A feature has been opened. Again, if you're interested in a public comment, please click on the icon with the question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen and type in, "I would like to make a public comment" in the Ask field and send it to all panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to. I have not received any requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature, Committee Chair?
Yes, please. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
It has been closed. Thank you.
So moving on to item 7A3, Senate Bill 66 by the Pro Tem related to Medi-Cal, Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. SB 66 would have allowed Medi-Cal reimbursement for a patient receiving both medical and mental health services at a federal federally qualified health center or rural health clinic on the same day. At the April 24, 26, 2019 board meeting, the board voted to support SB 66. As of September 1st, the bill was on the assembly floor, and on September 11th, the bill was ordered to the inactive file at the request of Assemblymember Calderon, and it has not moved.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. Is there any board or committee discussion on Senate Bill 66 by the Pro Tem? All right, seeing no committee discussion, Madam Moderator, could you please open the Q&A panel for public comment?
The Q&A panel has been opened. Again, if you would like to make a public comment, click on the icon with the question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen and type in, "I would like to make a public comment" in the Ask field and send it to all panelists. Any other communication will not be responded to. Again, we do have the instructions on the screen for your reference. And Committee Chair, we haven't received a request. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Seeing no further discussion from the committee for item 7A, we will now move to item 7B. And so what we'll do here is that some of these bills do have a request for the committee to take action. We will call up each bill individually. Mr. Glasspiegel will provide an overview, and then we'll have a board discussion and public comment, similar to what we've just done previously. And for committee members, if the bill, you'll note the recommended action, and that please go ahead and use the functions to make a motion, use the raise hand function if you have it on your screen to speak or to make a motion. So with that being said, Mr. Glasspiegel, AB 2112 by Assemblymember Ramos.
Thank you. This bill would establish the Office of Suicide Prevention within the California Department of Public Health and make the office responsible for, among other things, providing strategic guidance to statewide and regional partners regarding the best practices on suicide prevention and reporting to the legislature on the progress to reduce the rates of suicide. The bill would authorize the office to apply for and use federal grants, and this bill is consistent with the board's previous advocacy addressing suicide prevention efforts. AB 89, which was a Levine bill, Chapter 182, Statutes of 2017, was a board-sponsored bill which required psychologists to obtain or provide verification of 6 hours of training in suicide assessment and intervention. As of June 11th, so that's yesterday, the bill is now in the Senate Committee on Rules, which means it is passed out of the Assembly, and staff recommends the board staff recommends that the committee recommend the board take a support position on AB 2112.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. Is there any board or committee discussion or motion? Dr. Phillips?
I move that we recommend to the board to adopt a support position on this bill.
I second.
Whoops, I think I may have been on mute when I said that we had a motion on the table and a second by Dr. Kasuga. Madam Moderator, could you open the Q&A panel for public comment, please?
The Q&A feature has been opened. Again, members of the public, if you would like to make a public comment, Click on the icon with the question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen and click on the Ask field. Type in, "I would like to make a public comment," send it to all panelists. Committee Chair, no requests have been submitted for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
It has been closed. Thank you.
Is there further committee discussion on this item? Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Glasspiegel, could you please call the roll?
Kasuga?
Aye.
Fu?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Item 7B2, AB 2185 by Assembly Members Patterson and Gallagher. Mr. Glasspiegel?
Thank you. This bill would require the California Board of Psychology to issue a license for the practice of psychology to a person that is married to or is in a domestic partnership or other legal union with an active duty member of the Armed Forces of the United States who is assigned to a duty station in California and licensed in another state, subject to additional requirements. After the agenda was set, staff spoke to Assembly Member Patterson's office and learned that he is not pursuing this bill at this time. So that is why there is no action required, and staff will continue to watch AB 2185.
Thank you. Is there a committee discussion on this bill? All right, not seeing any committee discussion. Could we please open the Q&A panel?
The Q&A panel feature has been opened. Again, if you would like to make a public comment, the instructions are on your screen. Simply type, "I would like to make a public comment" in the Ask field and send it to all of the panelists. We haven't received any requests. Committee Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
It has been closed. Thank you.
Is there additional discussion on the Patterson bill by the committee? All right, seeing none, we will, and because there's no item on this, no action item on this item, we'll move to Assembly Bill 2549 by Assembly Member Salas, related to temporary licenses. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. AB 2549 would expand Business and Professions Code 115.6 to include the Board of Psychology. This is a section of the Business and Professions Code that requires the issuance of temporary licenses for certain boards. The board is currently not part of this section, but this bill is being amended to, the section is being amended within the bill AB 2549 to include the board along with other boards as well. The language of the legislation would require the board to submit to the department for approval draft regulations necessary to administer the provisions by January 1, 2022. At this time, it is also in the Senate Committee on Rules, which means it passed out of the Assembly. This was as of yesterday, which is the newest update. And staff does have this as a watch bill at this time. That is all I have.
Thank you so much. Is there committee discussion on this item?
Sorry, I couldn't find the hand feature. I'm historically inept with some forms of technology. This is Dr. Phillips. I'm curious, Mr. Glasspiegel, I noticed that the Board of Behavioral Science, at least from my reading of it, didn't seem to be included. Do you know what the distinction being made is?
From my discussions, the Board of Behavioral Sciences is not included in this bill, if I'm correct, because they have a previous legislation from a year or so ago that passed that is a temporary, some form of a temporary license bill, I believe.
Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion by the committee, Madam Moderator, could you please open the Q&A panel for public comment?
Yes, the Q&A panel has been open. Again, if you would like to make a public comment, type in "I would like to make a public comment" in the Ask field and send it to all of the panelists. Any other communication will not be responded to. I will pause for a moment. Committee Chair, no requests were submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. It has been closed.
Any additional questions from the committee related to AB 2549 by Assemblymember Sala? All right, seeing no further discussion on this item, we will move to item 7B4, Assembly Bill 2630 by Assemblymember Flora. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. AB 2630 is a bill that would provide the Department of Justice the authority to submit fingerprints to the, well, I apologize, provide that the Department of Justice is authorized to submit fingerprints to the FBI, where they will be retained for the purpose of being searched against future submissions to the FBI. This bill would authorize the DOJ to search latent fingerprints images against all retained fingerprint submissions. This bill would authorize the Department of Justice to collect fees for federal subsequent arrest notifications and will remit the fees to the FBI. The board has been in contact with the Department of Justice, and they plan for the implementation of a previous bill, AB 2641, which is a Florida Bill, Chapter 300, Statutes of 2018, and that for the Department of Justice to participate in the federal wrap back program, which I can discuss in a minute, which, well, I'll just tell you, it enables the Department of Justice to provide subsequent federal arrest and disposition information to applicant agencies. The FBI required explicit authority in California law to allow them to retain fingerprints for this purpose. The bill is at this time, at the last update is March 17th. It was, the hearing was postponed by the committee, but the board staff is requesting the committee recommend to the board take a support position on this bill. And in case I wasn't extremely clear about the wrap back program, the board, anytime a licensee or an applicant is fingerprinted, the board receives subsequent arrest notifications. But currently, we only receive subsequent arrest notifications for anything in California, which is the Department of Justice. Anything happening in real time outside of the state of California would have to be reported by the FBI. And right now, we only receive FBI as a snapshot in time at the time of printing.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. Is there a committee discussion on this bill? Dr. Phillips?
Yeah, I just wanted to indicate that I know that this is one of the issues that Ms. Sorek had flagged for us, I believe, fairly early in her tenure. So I just wanted to give kudos to our executive officer for her diligence in making sure that we have all information necessary for purposes of our licensing and enforcement process.
Dr. Kasuga?
I just wanted to ask a question, and I do appreciate the addition of FBI information with regards the checking of our potential licensees. I just wanted to ask a question with regards the submission of the fingerprint. If it's submitted to the FBI, is there a risk of if we have potential licensees that are dreamers, would there be a risk of the FBI sharing that information to, let's say, ICE, and kind of like putting some of the licensees at risk of having immigration action against them in applying for our psychology license?
This is Antoinette. Perhaps Ms. Marks can provide some additional insight into this, but what we're looking at here in particular with this bill is if someone is arrested in another state, that we as an applicant agency would be notified of that arrest. For example, if someone were to go to Florida and they had a DUI and it happened after they were licensed, we would not know that. We would only be able to rely on the individual attesting to that arrest or conviction upon renewal of their license. So right now, that's the only way we're notified. How the information is shared between the agencies would be between the agencies, between DOJ and the FBI. And right now, we're not a participating state in the RAP Back program. Years ago, when I spoke with the FBI about this program, I believe it was Idaho was the only one, and slowly other states have joined the program. And this counts for all agencies, not just Consumer Affairs, but if there's a foster parent or social services, anyone that's licensed in the state would have access to the RAP Back program through this legislation. Sorry if that didn't directly answer your question, but perhaps Ms. Marks might be able to speak a little further on this.
Yeah, I would want to hear from Dr. Kasuga if she has additional questions, but I think that would probably be the biggest impact to the board, is being able to get that information. I do want to add, in addition to any self-reporting that might come from the licensee, potentially we would hear it from the other state if the other state took action with respect to that arrest, if there's a conviction and subsequent discipline in that other state. But again, it's not direct. It'd be indirect for the board to receive that information. So Dr. Kasuga would want to know if you had additional questions about that.
I fully understand the benefit of getting that information from the FBI. I just wanted to see if in supporting this, there's going to be unintended consequences for our potential licensees that that are dreamers or have undocumented status, and the risk of having immigration action against them.
I don't think I could answer that question right now because I don't know what information the FBI has with respect to undocumented immigrants. Maybe somebody else can speak to that.
If it's helpful, Dr. Kasuga, I can add that there is nothing that would change on our end where we currently have applicants live scan, and those scans are run through the DOJ and the FBI at this time. So that there would be nothing changing in that regard, where the FBI is currently in receipt of our applicants' live scans at this time.
Okay, so that's a little bit helpful. So I think that this is the only change that will happen with this bill is that we're going to be getting more information from the FBI. But like as it is right now, we're sending fingerprint information the same way, and both agencies are having access to that. Did I understand that correctly, Mr. Glasspiegel?
Yes, I'm sorry. You are correct.
Thank you, Dr. Kusuga and Dr. Phillips. Did you have additional questions or comments on this item? I think one question I had following on is there's been in the last 2 years, there's been a lot of legislation around how DCA, or rather this board in particular, is able to use information for the purposes of application for licensure. So I just want to clarify that how this bill interacts with the network of those bills that have been passed and with the regs that we adopted in April.
Thank you, Mr. Fu. 2138 and renewals are two separate components. So 2138 affects applicants and current licensees that have licenses on like a probationary or a with revoked status, but it does not impact our ability to ask licensees upon renewal for conviction information.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Glasspiegel. I really appreciate it. So I don't see additional board discussion, committee discussion. Though, Dr. Kusuga, I see that you have the raise hand function, so I just want to make sure okay, never mind. And Ms. Marks, I see that you've been unmuted as well. So Ms. Marks, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that primarily the board's benefit would be, as Ms. Sorek described earlier, with being able to get subsequent arrest notifications from the FBI. There would be an additional impact that may or may not impact the board because of the use of latent fingerprints, as I understand the bill and how this would work, which is that if the FBI has a fingerprint in its database with respect to a crime, that could then be potentially matched with an applicant or a licensee. So I think that may impact the board in that it gets additional information if there's a match. I don't know how much additional impact that would add actually to the board. I don't know how much more information you'll get. But it is a little bit different from, or in addition to just the subsequent arrest notices.
Thank you, Ms. Marks. We'll bring it back to the committee for discussion, but Madam Moderator, could you open this up for, actually, real quick, do I have a motion from committee members on this item? Dr. Phillips?
I make a motion that we support the statute, or make a recommendation to the board that we support the statute.
A second.
All right, we have a motion by Dr. Phillips and a second by Dr. Kasuga to recommend to the board to support this bill. Madam Moderator, could you please open the Q&A panel for public comment?
This is the moderator. At the direction of the committee chair, I've opened the Q&A feature. Again, members of the public, if you would like to make a public comment, please click on the icon with a question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen. I am sharing the screen for your reference. In the Ask field, typically in the lower right of your WebEx screen, type, I would like to make a public comment, and send it to all panelists. Any other communication will not be responded to. Please note the Q&A feature is being used only as a means for the members of the public to represent that they would like to make a public comment. Once unmuted, the member of the public can make their verbal statements or comments. I will be pausing a moment to allow members of the public time to access the Q&A feature. Committee Chair, no requests were submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Please do, thank you.
It's been closed, thank you.
All right, is there further committee discussion on this item? Dr. Phillips?
No.
No, okay. With that said, Mr. Glasspiegel, could you please call the roll?
Of course. Kasuga.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you so much. We will now move to AB 2856 related to the Board of Psychology. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. AB 2856 was intended to be the board's original sunset extension bill, but as I said previously, due to COVID, all boards going through sunset are receiving, if legislation passes, a one-year extension, and that is being reflected in SB 1474, which we will discuss in a few minutes. So at this time, the board is, or staff is continuing to watch AB 2856, and there is no action requested at this time.
Thank you. Is there board committee discussion on this item? And seeing no committee discussion, can we please turn on the Q&A panel, Madam Moderator?
The Q&A feature has been turned on. Instructions on the screen, and if you would like to make a public comment, submit, I would like to make a public comment in the ask and the question box. We received no requests. Committee Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
It has been closed. Thank you.
All right, so now we will take on AB 3045 by Assemblymember Gray related to DCA boards and military spousal licenses. Mr. Glasspiegel?
Thank you. AB 3045 is a bill that would require boards not subject to the temporary license provision described in the Business Professions Code section 115.6 to issue a license to an applicant if the applicant meets specified requirements, including that the applicant supplies evidence satisfactory to the board that the applicant is an honorably discharged veteran of the Armed Forces of the United States or is married to or in a domestic partnership or other legal union with an active duty member of the Armed Forces and stationed here in California. The bill would require an applicant for a license to include a signed affidavit attesting to the fact that the applicant meets all requirements for license. Now, just to be clear, AB 3045 would require the board to issue this temporary license as long as the board is not subject to the temporary license provision of 115.6. AB 2549 that we discussed earlier, which is agenda item 3 of this section, is written to add us into that temporary license provision, but should that bill not pass, then, and AB 3045 does, we would be subject to the temporary license provision under, or this, the license, it's not even temporary license, the license provision in this bill. Due to the inability for board staff to verify that the applicant meets licensure requirements in California, board staff recommend that the the board take an opposed position on AB 3045. And as of yesterday, it has passed out of the Assembly, and it is in the Senate Committee on Rules waiting for committee assignment.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. I have a question just related to this bill and to your comments just now. So this bill doesn't allow, let me take a step back. So the bill allows the applicant to make a self-attestation that they fulfill the licensing requirements, but the bill doesn't specify that the board can investigate if those attestations are true, and therefore we would be unable to reject the application for licensure if they actually end up not meeting our basic requirements. Is that accurate? Am I capturing that correctly?
Yes.
And I'll actually go to Dr. Phillips. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Phillips.
I was just going to inquire, I believe it's correct that we already expedite the provision of licenses for people that find themselves in these circumstances. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And Dr. Phillips actually provided me a reminder that in our summer journal that just was released a couple days ago, Mr. Glasspiegel wrote a really fantastic article for options for members of the military and their families as it relates to the licensure process. And as Dr. Phillips just alluded to, the applications are expedited for members who have been honorably discharged, as well as spouses, domestic partners, or those in other legal unions with an active duty member. The article begins on page 3 and continues to page 4 and provides a lot of information there because I think it's clear that this board wants to be supportive of our military and our military families when it comes to the licensure process. So I just want to, Dr. Phillips reminded me of this really great article that Mr. Glasspiegel just wrote for our summer journal. Is there additional committee discussion?
I can do the motion.
Please, go ahead, Dr. Kasuga.
I move that this committee recommend to the board to take an opposed position on AB 3045.
Seconds.
We have a motion by Dr. Kasuga and a second by Dr. Phillips to recommend to the board to oppose this bill. And so I'm going to, yes, Ms. Marks?
I just wanted to point out that as I read it, the bill says in sub A, a board not specified in section 115.6 shall, after appropriate investigation, shall issue a license to the applicant. So it does have that language in there. It doesn't necessarily indicate what that investigation entails.
Mr. Glasspiegel, does that change the disposition of staff's recommendation based on Ms. Mark's comments?
Due to the lack of specificity, it does not.
All righty. Madam Moderator, could you please open the Q&A panel for public comment, please?
The Q&A panel has been opened. Again, the instructions are on your screen, and if you would like to make a comment, just click on the Q&A icon, type in, I would like to make a public comment in the ask field and send it to all panelists. I'll pause for a moment to give members of the public the time to access the feature. Committee Chair, no requests were submitted for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
It has been closed. Thank you.
All right, seeing no further discussion from the committee and staff, I'm going to ask that Mr. Glasspiegel go ahead and call the roll for this for the motion before us to recommend to the board to oppose this bill. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Kasuga?
Aye.
Who?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. So we're going to try to provide some certainty with related to time in a very uncertain time in our lives right now. So the committee's intention is to continue forward till 12:30, and we hope that we will be able to wrap up the agenda by then. But if not, we will stop at 12:30 to take a lunch break at that time. So I just want to share that publicly, so for planning purposes, and also for those who intend to order their food, this might be a good time to do that while we continue on for the next 40 minutes or so. So with that being said, we will now take on item 7, Senate Bill 1474, related to our sunset. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. SB 1474 is the bill that would modify the board's sunset date to January 1, 2022. There is a hearing set for this bill on June 18th. It was on June 9th, it was moved to the suspense file, and it has its suspense hearing on the 18th. And that is it. Staff is recommending a support position.
All right, thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. Is there committee discussion on this bill? All right, seeing no committee discussion, because I think we're all, well, let's not presume. Is there a motion to support the extension of our sunset by another year? Dr. Phillips?
I make a motion that we recommend to the board that we adopt, that we support the extension of our sunset for an additional year.
I second.
All right, we have a motion by Dr. Phillips and a second by Dr. Kasuga to recommend to the board to support Senate Bill 1474. Madam Moderator, could you please open the Q&A panel for public comment?
The Q&A panel has been open. Again, the instructions are on your screen for your reference. And if you would like to make a comment, type in, I would like to make a comment in the ask field, send it to all panelists. Committee Chair, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
It has been closed. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to make a revision to my comments that we are, while we will endeavor to take a lunch break at 12:30, if we have agenda items continuing, we will be calling for a 5-minute break at the top of the hour at noon, so that folks can take care of any needs they may have. So we will take a break at 12 p.m. for about 5 minutes, and then continue onward through the agenda. And if there are no remaining items after 12:30, we will recess. So this next section, is a review of watched bills. So these are bills that staff have not recommended a position on, but are currently watching. We will not take each bill up one by one. We will ask that committee members let us know which bills they would like to discuss. I do want to make a note that because during public comment, we did receive a request, I believe from Dr. Pacheco, for AB 2253. We will pull AB 2253 by Assemblymember Lowe for discussion as a part of this review of watch bills. And also and in that spirit of identifying bills that, that committee members are interested in discussing, I would like to also pull item 8, AB 2028 by Assemblywoman Aguiar-Curry, related to state agencies, as well as AB 2704 by Assemblymember Ting, related to data collection. That's item 18. So currently for discussion under review of watch bills, we have then items 8, 13, which is AB 2253, and item 18. Committee members, Dr. Phillips, go ahead. Actually, I'm going to start with Mr. Glasspiegel first because he might have a staff comment that might relate to our plan forward. Mr. Glasspiegel?
I just wanted to make sure that we do call roll for SB 1474.
Okay. Well, in my case, I forgot to do that, so I apologize. So we'll return to Dr. Phillips. We'll go ahead and go back to the roll call for that, and then I'll turn to your comments. All right. So, Mr. Glasspiegel, hearing no other committee discussion items for a motion by Dr. Phillips to support 1474, to recommend to the board to support 1474, and a second by Dr. Kasuga. Could you please call the roll?
Kasuga.
Aye.
Fu?
Aye.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passed.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel, for calling that to my attention. I really appreciate it. So going back to item 7C, Dr. Phillips.
I'd like us to discuss 7C4, which I believe is AB 1263.
Great. So, Dr. Are there additional bills you would like to pull, Dr. Phillips?
No.
All right. Dr. Kasuga, do you have any bills that you would like to pull?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to pull AB 2164 and AB 2360, item number 12 and 14 for telehealth.
Excellent. Okay. So what we are going to do is, in terms of process, what we'll do is we'll take up items 4, 8, 12, 13, 14, and 18 for discussion on a one-by-one basis for discussion and conversation. And then we'll do public comment on each item as well for those items I just listed. At the conclusion of the discussion on those pulled items, I will ask for public comment for any additional bills that we did not discuss, should there be public comment there as well. So that's how we will go ahead and proceed. And I think since we're actually fairly close to the top of the hour, I want to just go ahead for us to take the break now and for us to resume at 12:05 p.m. And we can just start afresh with item 4 when we get there. So the committee will take a break and return at 12:05.
Thank you, Mr. Fu.
Thank you, Dr. Kisuga. All right, the time being 12:05, we will return back from our break, and we will go ahead and take up item C4 related to AB 1263 by Assembly Member Lowe. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. AB 1263 would prohibit a contract or proposed contract involving the provision of a consumer service by a licensee regulated by a licensing board from including a provision limiting the consumer's ability to file a complaint with that board or to participate in the board's investigation into the licensee. The bill would specify that a waiver of these provisions is contrary to public policy and is void and unenforceable. The bill would provide that a violation of these provisions by a licensee constitutes unprofessional conduct subject to discipline by the licensee's regulatory board. As of January 30th, 2020, the bill has passed through the first house and is in the Senate Committee on Rules, waiting for assignment, but there's been no update since January 30th, 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. Dr. Phillips.
And perhaps you can help explain this to me, Mr. Glasspiegel, but it seems to me, since this is a provision that would get rid of a roadblock to our enforcement of the licensing laws and our regulations, that it would be appropriate for us to support the bill. So I'm wondering why staff has allocated this to a watch bill.
Okay. This is Antoinette. I'm trying to remember when we talked about this at a roundtable discussion with the other programs. This really had to do with dental practices and contracts between those providers and their patients. And the only thing that we could think of that may be similar is an informed consent that would be signed by the client and the provider. And if a provider were to put in language in the contract prohibiting a filing of a complaint, I would believe, and Ms. Marks can correct me if I'm wrong, that would be unenforceable, that client would still have that ability to file a complaint with the board. So we didn't feel like this necessarily connected to our board in that way, because we don't deal with contracts the same as the dental profession. But perhaps Ms. Monterrubio and Ms. Marks can speak a little bit more to this issue.
Oh, sorry, this is Sandra. I was talking and I didn't realize my mute button was on. No, I agree with you, Anton. I think we did have a discussion in regards to comparing ourselves to kind of the other boards that deal with the contracts. We don't see many of these type of cases at all. So for an enforcement perspective, I don't really see much of an issue with it. We still would investigate complaints. Again, not something that we've had to deal with, not a problem for us at all.
Dr. Phillips?
I'm a little confused by the attitude we're taking, and that is, if in an informed consent agreement, which all of our licensees should be getting in advance of providing services or at the time of providing services, or at least reducing the informed consent to writing, it would be possible to include such a provision, which is fairly typical in, I think, some other healthcare providers' agreements. I'm not saying our licensees have bad intent, but I don't know why we would not want to support a position that would make any such provision if a licensee was to put it in their informed consent or in any other agreement, to not want to make that void and unenforceable, and also not be able to discipline the licensee for having included such a provision. Such a provision could have a very chilling effect on a consumer. A consumer might not know that we would still accept a complaint under those circumstances. So it would be my suggestion that we take a support position on this, even though we may not run into it. It's certainly something that other healthcare providers do. It's certainly something a licensee could include. And that's not to besmirch the majority of our licensees, but I do believe that it would be, I do believe this is an idea that we'd want to be supportive of in a proactive way.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. I'm going to turn to Dr. Kasuga, and then I'm going to go back to Dr. Phillips, because I suspect what you're also hinting at is a possible motion on your end. So, Dr. Kasuga?
I am agreeing with Dr. Phillips with regards that this applies to our profession, and especially with informed consent. Possible violation. So yeah, I'm just agreeing with Dr. Phillips on this one.
So Dr. Phillips, it sounds like you have a motion in mind to recommend to the board to support AB 1263. Is that correct, Dr. Phillips?
That is correct. I'm sorry, my screen keeps changing on me. That's correct. So I make a motion that we recommend to the board to support this particular provision. Yes.
I second.
So we have a motion by Dr. Phillips and a second by Dr. Kasuga. And I'm going to turn to Madam Moderator to go ahead and open up the Q&A panel for public comment on this item.
This is the moderator. The Q&A panel has been open. The instructions are on your screen for your reference. Just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Click or submit I would like to make a public comment in the ask field. Send it to all panelists. And again, we won't respond to any other requests, but I will pause for a moment to allow members of the public the time to access the feature. Committee Chair, no requests were submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Has been closed. Thank you.
So bringing it back to the committee discussion, Ms. Marks, I see you've unmuted yourself, so I'll kick it over to you.
Yes, I'm sorry. I have several windows open, so I can flip back and forth between the materials and the mic, and so sometimes I'm not realizing that I'm still muted. Yeah, I think I see where Dr. Phillips is going with this, and I think I agree. I don't know why the provision of psychological services wouldn't be considered a contract for a consumer service. I don't think this would apply to any kind of settlement agreement, because I don't think a settlement agreement would be considered a consumer service, but I still think it could include the provision of psychological services generally, if that's helpful at all.
Thank you, Ms. Marks. One thing just for this discussion purposes, because this is a watch bill, is when we do go to the full board in July, Mr. Glasspiegel, it might be helpful at the time. I would like to see at least personally the analysis on this bill on the Assembly side, or if by the time July hits, the Senate side has a analysis on the bill, because I think that would help further discussion and on this bill, and for that purpose. But I'm in support of my colleague's motion today. So, Dr. Phillips?
I was just going to say, I think part of the confusion here is that we're all aware that people enter into informed consent. But as Ms. Marks pointed out, informed consent is a contract for the provision of psychological services. So we do enter into contracts with our clients. And as such, I think we want to make sure that this type of provision doesn't creep into people's informed consent as a way of protecting themselves from enforcement proceedings. So I just wanted to add that as a further point of clarification.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. I'm not seeing additional committee discussion on this bill, nor am I seeing staff looking to weigh in. So I'm going to ask that Mr. Glasspiegel call roll.
Kasuga?
Aye.
Fu?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. So we will now take up item, like some of my colleagues here, I'm also flipping between multiple screens to try to find. So we're going to pick up now item 8, AB 2028 by Assemblymember Aguilar Curry, related to state agencies. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. AB 2028 is a bill that would modify the requirements for the board to post meeting materials on its website prior to the board meeting. At the time of writing this materials, the bill was written to have a 10-day prior requirement. It has now been amended to 48 hours or the same day that the materials were provided to the committee members. As of the 9th of June, the bill has passed out of the Assembly and is with the Senate Committee on Rules waiting on committee assignment.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. My question on this bill is for staff is the 48-hour limitation going to affect the ability of the board to carry out our duties? Would it hinder our ability to engage in our work as it relates to consumer protection?
We don't see anything that would hinder us at this point with being able to meet the 48-hour requirement. It has come up in discussion that petition hearings are something, but we've been tossing the idea back and forth, and I don't think there's concern at this point for that the 48 hours would affect us negatively.
Historic?
Generally speaking, whenever there is a requirement, I think the board will always give a good faith effort in getting any written materials out on our website or available to the public. As soon as we have information, we make that available. There have been times in the past where we've received information, for example, from the budget office, and we have to print it at the hotel. Obviously, those were pre-COVID times, but generally speaking, whenever there's a requirement like this, it does limit our ability to provide the board with potentially useful or helpful information to make decisions. And we also have, we do not administer our website. That's something that's done through the Department of Consumer Affairs. And anything that is posted on our website has to be ADA compliant, which could take additional staff time and resources to make that information available. So this is really one of those difficult conversations because one of our values is transparency in our strategic plan, and it's something that we strive to provide useful and helpful information to the public so that they can be part of the discussion and the deliberative process. But we are also bound by a limitation on information that sometimes comes last minute that we have to be able to provide the board to make decisions. So this is a tough one. This is why we have it in the watch list, because an opposed might give an impression that we don't want to make materials available, which I don't think would be accurate. But at the same time, do I believe that there may be challenges because of this requirement? Yes, there may be challenges.
Thank you, Ms. Sorik. Before turning to Dr. Phillips, I'm just going to ask one more question, which is, are there exemptions in the bill, or has the author or other boards expressed a desire for certain exemptions related to perhaps like a budget document or any other items that might, due to their nature, fall within the 48 hours? And I ask that with the budget question in mind because I know from our own experience as a board, staff will do a fantastic job in accessing the budget information that they do have, but oftentimes the hand carry from DCA fiscal comes on the day of. And that would impact, I think, our board's ability to have a meaningful discussion about the budget, especially given our recent conversation in April about our current budget situation. And so Mr. Glasspiegel or Ms. Sorik, I would be curious to hear if the author has expressed a certain understanding of certain documents that may be exempted from the 48-hour window. And then I'll turn to Dr. Phillips after that question.
At the time of the amendment from 10 days to 48 hours, they did include an amendment to say current year legislation and updates to that are exempt from this requirement.
Thank you. So it's not inclusive of any other things like the budget. Okay. Dr. Phillips?
Yeah, I was going to say similarly to what you were saying, Mr. Fu, that we also receive a fair number of hand carries relatively late in the process sometimes 24 hours before we actually meet, or even sometimes on the morning that we meet. So obviously that would have a chilling effect on our ability to get those hand carries. Would also, it seems to me, put more pressure on board staff to have those materials, which are sometimes not available to them, available before that 48-hour window. Does the public also receive a copy of the petition packets, a redacted copy of the petition packet, if people make petitions? Anybody?
My understanding is that we make those copies, this is Ron, I think we make those copies available at the hearings usually, that those documents the redacted versions are available at the hearing. But I'm not sure if it's done before the day of or if it's in advance, so I would defer to Ms. Monterrubio or Ms. Sorik on that.
The petition packets are made available at the meeting, not before.
So this statute conceivably could require us to provide those petition packets 48 hours in advance, if I'm reading this correctly. But sometimes we're dependent on the Attorney General's office, for instance, giving us the materials far enough in advance for us to be able to do that. Is that correct?
I would say that that is correct. I know that some of the evidence that's going to be submitted by the petitioner is presented at the meetings and made public once the ALJ, the administrative law judge takes that into evidence. But the redacted petition packets are made available at the beginning of the hearing.
Yeah, I was also thinking of that. Sometimes the petitioners will bring in exhibits on the day, and it's often quite a confusing process, and they don't have enough copies, et cetera, et cetera. So I would assume that the 48 hours would also apply to that, which, and perhaps Ms. Marks can correct me if I'm wrong on this, may affect, therefore, the hearings and the availability of submitting additional evidence on the part of the petitioner. Seems to me that maybe we don't want to take an opposed position to this, because we obviously want to create as much transparency as possible and give people as much advanced time as possible to review the materials that are going to relate to the agenda of the board. But maybe there need to be some additional carve-outs, and I don't know how we would go about that, whether that's through a dialogue with the author's office, an expression of concern by way of a letter. I'm not sure, but it does seem to me that procedurally this is going to be a difficult thing and may cut off the availability of a lot of up-to-date information at the time of our board meetings.
If I may make a suggestion that that staff reach out to, not in an official, staff reach out to the author's office to identify if there are additional amendments being contemplated in relation to what we discussed here. And we can have this item also as a discussion topic at our July board meeting. I would be curious how our committee members feel about that.
I think that would be a great way for, and this is Dr. Phillips, a great way for committee members to, for the staff to be able to answer these additional questions, because I know we strike a difficult balance here because transparency is one of our most important values. But perhaps staff to get further clarification and for us to have a fuller discussion at the board meeting.
Ms. Marks?
I was going to comment that the issues with availability of the documents or the materials may be exacerbated when you're looking at the potential of having an emergency meeting, which only requires the 48-hour notice to begin with. So the board may not even know that it's going to be having a meeting until 48 hours in advance, let alone have all the materials prepared. I think it's, I think that likelihood is highlighted in these days, the COVID days, when we're looking at potential health and safety issues and needs for waivers, et cetera. So I'm wondering, because it does not look like there's any reference to holding either a special or an emergency meeting, that the potential of that and the likelihood that the materials would not be available become that much greater.
That's really helpful, Ms. Marks, and I wonder if we can add that to perhaps the list of things that staff can identify with the author's office to gain better clarity about their intentions. Mr. Glasspiegel?
Yep, I've taken notes and I will reach out to the author's office.
So there's no motion at the on the table currently. So I'm gonna, and it doesn't sound like we're headed in that direction as we gain more information. So I'm gonna ask Madam Moderator to please open the Q&A panel for public comment.
This is the moderator. I've opened the Q&A feature. If you would like to make a comment, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your WebEx screen and type in, "I would like to make a comment," in the Ask field, typically located at the lower right of your screen, and send to all panelists. I'll pause for a moment. Committee Chair, no requests were received. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
It has been closed. Thank you.
All right. Oh, yes, I heard a voice. All right. So it's 12:30, and we have at least, I believe, 4 more bills at minimum for discussion, as well as then the items 8 and 9 and 10. So we're going to go ahead and take a break for lunch. I'm going to suggest about 30 minutes. So we return around 1 o'clock to continue the committee's business. This will also allow time for our wonderful moderators and the board staff to also get prepared for the remaining items for the day as well, and for them to also take a quick lunch as well. So what we'll do is we will take a break and return at 1 p.m. To complete the committee's business. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee of the Board of Psychology. We are returning back from our brief lunch break. We are currently on item 7C, and as a note to any of our attendees that this call is being recorded, and so will be made available afterwards as well. In continuing with our review of watch bills, next on the list is AB 2164 by Assembly Members Rivas and regarding telehealth. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. AB 2164 would provide that a federally qualified health center or rural health clinic visit includes an encounter between a patient of those locations and a healthcare provider using telehealth by synchronous real-time or asynchronous store and forward. The bill would clarify for purposes of the federally qualified health clinic health center or rural health clinic visit that face-to-face contact between a healthcare provider and a patient is not required for an F2HC or RHC, which is the clinic and health center, to bill for telehealth by synchronous real-time or asynchronous store and forward if specified requirements are met, including that the billable provider in the Medi-Cal program who is employed by the center supervises or provides the services for that patient via telehealth, synchronous real-time or asynchronous store and forward. The second portion of the bill that's captured in the memo is the e-consult service, but that was amended out on June 4th. At this time, it is in the Senate Committee on Rules, so this bill has passed through the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. Dr. Kasuga, you have raised this item.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Fu. Mr. Glasspiegel, I just wanted to clarify that in this a bill, when they say telehealth, that includes access to psychologists via telehealth.
I believe so.
So the reason why I wanted to discuss this bill is because given the current times, I'd like to discuss supporting telehealth bills to increase access to mental health services through our licensees for access to mental health services during this time. And I just wanted to make sure that we can support as many telehealth bills as long as it doesn't run contrary to any of the Board of Psychology regulations. So I would love to support telehealth bills that if there's no issues according to the staff.
From my review, I don't believe this bill conflicts with any of our current regulations or laws.
Dr. Kasuga, based on Mr. Glasspiegel's comments, did you have additional questions or did you want a recommendation to the board to take a particular position on this bill?
I do. I would like to make a motion that the committee recommend to the board to support AB 2164.
Great, thank you. Dr. Phillips?
Mr. Glasspiegel, I was wondering what the thinking was in keeping this as a watch bill as opposed to taking a position.
That is a very good question. I'm trying to remember when we put together the agenda and reviewed all the bills, why it ended up there, and I'm pulling a blank on a specific reason.
you.
It looks like this bill was significantly amended on June 4th, and as I was during our break discussing with Mr. Glasspiegel this bill, a couple of years back at an outreach committee meeting, we had Department of, I believe it was Managed Care, come out, and they talked to us about what telehealth meant in these types of settings. And from my memory, it was a very limited exposure to telehealth services. An individual client would have to go to one of these centers and have a video face-to-face call. So this would not include a phone call. It would have to be conducted at the regional center. It was a very limited scope, and I don't know if this bill would change that, and if it's the will of the committee and ultimately the board to support that. I would suggest that we get some clarification on what that telehealth would be considered as, because the setup that was presented to us seemed not very accessible, and it's certainly not accessible for clients in rural communities, that they would have to be physically at the location and be face-to-face by video conference in order for the provision of telehealth to be able to be provided.
If it's all right, Mr. Fu, I just want to add, I believe this bill, when we, I don't think it's me doing it. Okay, the bill, when we set the agenda, the bill didn't have that many specified changes, and then later it was amended to be more specific in more of its current form. So I think that's the reason it was a watch early on.
Jason, this is Noreen. I'm not sure if this is part of it, but I'm looking at it and it seems to relate to a patient and a physician surgeon. Those medical services is that correct? And could that have been the thinking?
Mr. Fu, if you could open this up for public comment, I believe that CPA is possibly supporting this legislation and might be able to provide some valuable input into the discussion.
Please, oh, that sounds great. Thank you, Ms. Sorick. So, Madam Moderator, could you please open up the public comment and see if there is public comment on this item? And while you do that, I still also see hands raised by Dr. Kasuga and Dr. Phillips. So if Dr. Phillips and Dr. Kasuga, if you want to weigh in or wait until public comment from I leave that to your discretion.
Yeah, my only feeling was that I feel like we're flying a little blind here, so I'd like to get further analysis of this bill before we take action on it.
Madam Moderator, could you mute Dr. Winkleman's line? She's indicated that she would like to make public comment.
Yes. Elizabeth Winkleman, you've been unmuted.
Thank you. Hi, it's Dr. Elizabeth Winkleman from California Psychological Association. Can you hear me? It looks like I'm still muted.
Oh, we can hear you.
Oh, great, great. Yeah, CPA does support this bill. I believe it does apply to psychologists, and that telehealth is defined very broadly. I wanted to give some context also that during the coronavirus, a lot of telehealth restrictions, such as the type that Ms. Sorek was describing, have been lifted, and we're advocating along with APA to make those, to extend those expansions of telehealth beyond the public health emergency. What we have been hearing from psychologists is that the expansion of telehealth has been incredibly helpful to their patients in terms of access to care and continuity of care. And then, of course, also it promotes public health because it requires less in-person interaction. And I'm sure you've also all read that the coronavirus is causing a major spike in mental illness and the need for mental health care. And the one other comment that I wanted to make is that particularly in settings like these that work with lower income populations, especially in these populations, access to telehealth has been really important because they may not have the means to travel or take a break to in the middle of their day if they are at work, not have that much flexibility at their jobs to go to an in-person session. So it's been very valuable, and I would encourage you to consider supporting this bill.
Thank you, Dr. Winkleman. Madam Moderator, I don't see any additional public comment, but if we can keep Dr. Winkleman's line unmuted, just in case members of the committee have any questions for Dr. Winkleman, and I see Dr. Kasuga, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Fu. I just wanted to ask the board staff if there's any further analysis that has been done since the new changes have happened. I don't assume there has been, but like, is that something that we could do in order to just like see how the current changes, and given the current COVID environment, if we can have more up-to-date analysis from board staff with regards to specific legislation or bills?
Yeah, that's not a problem. We can have that completed before the for the next meeting.
Mr. Glasspiegel, you mean before the next board meeting? I mean, I'm hoping it's Dr. Winkleman again, that this could be brought to the board.
Yes, that is what I meant. The board meeting in July.
Dr. Phillips?
Yeah, I am confused. I just tried to scan the language a little bit. I am confused as to whether this applies to anybody but physicians or surgeons. It talks in general ways about clinicians, but then when you get down to the definition section, it talks about different types of doctors. So perhaps as part of the analysis, that could be clarified.
No problem.
Dr. Kasuga? Okay, I think I don't see any additional public comment or additional questions. So Madam Moderator, could you please close the Q&A panel?
Yes, would you like me to mute Elizabeth Winkleman's line?
I think so. I think I suspect there might be a motion coming. So
thank
yes,
you.
Please.
So yes, I'll be closing the Q&A feature at this moment.
Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you.
So I believe, Dr. Kasuga, you were inviting a motion on this item. And I'm not sure if I heard a second from Dr. Phillips, but I just want to confirm, Dr. Kasuga, that you would like to recommend to the board to make a support motion for this item?
Just wanted to kind of like talk a little bit about that motion because I really want to support it, but I also want to get the analysis from board staff. Is it like possible for me to make a motion to recommend a support, but also have the analysis ready for the next board meeting and have it concurrent, simultaneous?
I think what we can do is, if that's what you would like, we can ask that this item be lifted from the review of watch bill section for the July agenda and have it on the an item by item, and to have the agenda and ask staff to go ahead and have an analysis with that in mind. But we certainly don't have to make a recommendation today to support the bill. We can certainly wait until July to for the analysis, and then at that time engage as a board in that discussion. Dr. Phillips?
I think that may be the more prudent way to move, since we're not exactly sure what we're supporting or what we would be supporting. So if Dr. Kasuga is amenable to that, but I would like to give it priority so that we make sure to discuss it.
That's fine. That's fine by me. And I just wanted to acknowledge also that Dr. Phillips brought up some good points with regards the need for clarity in some of the language that's in the bill.
Great. So what we'll do then, if Mr. Glasspiegel, you can have an analysis for us for our July board meeting and ensure that this item is listed up as a discussion item for the board outside of the watch bill section. I think we would really appreciate that, and we won't need a motion for that at this time.
No problem.
The next item on the agenda is AB 2253, item 13, by Assembly Member Lowe. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Sorry, I'm just thumbing through my paperwork here. Okay.
No worries. We did move very quickly, so I apologize for that. Thank you for your patience with us.
No problem at all. Okay, so we're at 2253. Yes, 13. Okay, this bill would clarify that in an exempt setting, experience that constitutes qualifying experience for licensure or experience required for licensure as applicable is determined by reference to the act regulating the profession. As of the 9th, this bill has passed through the Assembly and is in the Senate Rules Committee waiting for committee assignment.
I apologize. I was on mute during this time. I see no committee discussion. I understand that this was an item that was brought up during public comment. So if not a moderator, you could perhaps open the Q&A panel and see if Dr. Pacheco or others in the public would like to make a comment on this item.
Yes, I've opened up the Q&A feature. And I see Victor Pacheco is on the line. Would you like me to unmute him?
Yes, please.
Okay. And just a reminder for everyone else and the member of the public who would like to participate, the instructions are on the screen for your reference. Simply click on the Q&A icon, type in, I would like to make a public comment in the ask field and send it to all panelists. Victor, your line has been unmuted.
Thank you. Just a reminder that I'm representing 1,500 psychologists for AFSCME 2620 as their occupational chair. A good third of our psychologists are unlicensed, and a week doesn't go by without 2 or 3 people getting termination notices for having violated that 4-year time. This bill I would hope you would support because presently any kind of experience can be counted towards that 4 years. So you could be an administrator of a drug treatment program, not a clinical position, and they will count that time. They will count time for being a welfare eligibility worker, a non-clinical position. So this bill would clarify that the only experience that would count would be those recognized by the Board of Psychology as counting for hours towards licensure. It seems like a simple fix. You know, a number of people can, I know in my case, I worked in the field a good 8 years before I got my degree. So if you counted those hours, I couldn't, you know, I wouldn't be hired by the state. So this just clarifies that the only experience that's going to count for that 4 years is experience recognized by the Board of Psychology towards licensing. So I would hope you would support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pacheco. I think we also have public comment from Dr. Winkleman.
Yes, this is the moderator, Dr. Winkleman. I've just unmuted your mic.
Thank you, Elizabeth Winkleman from CPA again. CPA is supporting this bill as well. And we have also heard from Dr. Pacheco and others the negative effects that the current language is having, both in terms of the psychology trainees that are getting terminated, but also in terms of the continuity of care for consumers. So, so we also support and would ask that the committee supports this and brings that to the full board. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Winkleman.
This is the moderator. There's no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. It has been closed.
So I'm curious just to hear, well, first of all, is there committee discussion amongst committee members about what we've just heard in this bill in particular, Dr. Phillips?
I'm somewhat confused by what this has to do with the 4-year prohibition in the penal code. I don't think it does change that situation, if I'm reading it correctly. But I do think it brings experience in the exempt setting in conformity with the psychology licensing laws. So I would be supportive of that, but I'm uncertain as to how it relates to the 4 years, the 4 years in the penal code.
Mr. Glasspiegel or Ms. Sorick, any thoughts on Dr. Phillips' question? Dr. Kasuga, I see your hand. I just want to make sure we get to Dr. Phillips' question first. But we'll go to you, Dr. Kasuga, after Ms. Sorick responds.
It appears with looking at the language that this is a cleanup provision that just clarifies what kind of experience will be counted towards that limitation in an exempt setting. So in my reading of it, that's my understanding of it. And when 2914 was drafted into law, and I remember working with Mr. Pacheco with Eggman's office on this, our understanding was that the experience, at least insofar as the Business and Professions Code was concerned, was that that experience would be psychological services that would be counted as experience towards licensure. And that was the limitation that we wanted to make sure there was that all of the different provisions of the different codes were seen equally, and that the 5-year limitation was on there. These are other provisions, so they wouldn't be under our law, but it seems like this bill's trying to address some cleanup provisions insofar as what is determined as experience towards that, in this case, 4-year cap. That's my understanding.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
Dr. Kasuga?
I wanted to just ask Dr. Phillips that question to Mr. Glasspiegel on the reasoning behind this being put on the watch list as opposed to an actionable bill.
When we were all looking at bills, this one had to do with other agencies, and it seemed like a kind of a small cleanup bill that was more for internal purposes. And now that Mr. Pacheco has elaborated, I understand the impetus behind the bill at this point. But that's the reason, is because it just seemed like a cleanup bill that was just for kind of some behind the scenes work.
Ms. Marks?
I just want to ask of those people who've looked at this more closely to make sure that it is cleanup and not meant to extend the waiver beyond the time where the experience has been accrued. In other words, if the person has accrued all their experience, is it meant to take the waiver beyond that time? So to allow continued employment after the experience has been accrued beyond that 4-year period?
Are you directing this question to staff, or should we ask that Madam Moderator perhaps unmute Dr. Pacheco and Dr. Winkleman's line? Just trying to make sure.
They may have more insight into that. Staff may as well, but.
So Ms. Chung, if you would like, and also Madam Moderator, if you could be so kind to unmute Dr. Pacheco and Dr. Winkleman's lines to see if they may have a response to Ms. Mark's questions.
Yes, I will unmute Winkleman first. You've been unmuted.
Thank you. Yes, it would not extend the time. It would just define, the amount of what would count towards those 4 years, more specifically in reference to the psychology licensure law. And I noticed that some people are referring to Dr. Pacheco and Mr. Pacheco. It's Dr. Pacheco. He's a very valued member in our profession. So just to clarify, it's Dr. Pacheco.
Thank you. I will now unmute Dr. Pacheco. Thank you for that. Your line has been unmuted.
Thank you. That 4 years is a good question, and I got to be careful not to answer it in the legal or legislative sense. I have seen the state count 4 years chronologically from the beginning of a paid practicum. Practicum might have been, $300 a month, but they counted it and the 4-year clock started. I've seen other calculations in terminations, non-punitive terminations, where they count 13 months of this job, and then a year later they counted 7 months of this job, and then there was a break, and then they total all those hours up and come up with 4 years. So I'm not sure how this bill is going to calculate 4 hours. And that might be in a different part of the penal code, but practically speaking, more recently I've seen non-punitive terminations where they're picking and choosing time, perhaps over an 8-year time span, because the person took a break and did a business unrelated to psychology, and then they came back. So I think that'll be my input for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pacheco and Dr. Winkleman, for the insights. Ms. Marks or Ms. Chung, reflections?
I just wanted to confirm that I think what you're saying is they counted as part of the waiver employment that did not need to be waived because it did not include the practice of psychology. Is that what you're saying? And this clarifies that the waivered period would only include the employment that actually requires a waiver, which is the practice of psychology. Is that what you're saying?
Madam Moderator, I think Ms. Marks' question is directed to Dr. Pacheco and Dr. Winkleman.
I will go ahead and unmute their line. I have unmuted their lines, and you are able to mute and unmute at your pleasure. Is that okay, Committee Chair?
Well, in regards to those timelines, we have inquired of the state to clarify how it is they count time, and they have not gotten back to us in 6 months. We have asked 4 times the method by which they count the 4 years. The only information I have is how, when we get a non-punitive termination and we're going to represent them, and we can see how it is they calculate it, and I'll tell you, it's all over the place. You know, I've seen them calculate work time at Macy's as having counted towards the 4 years. So I think that's the breakdown between perhaps what the Board of Psychology does and what the state of California does in exempt settings. Thank you.
And this is Elizabeth Winkleman. I wanted to say that, so what the proposal is that it would only count if it's the type of experience that would count for supervised professional experience towards licensure. So, so yes, they would otherwise need the license to practice and to engage in those activities, but it wouldn't count things like that Dr. Pacheco mentioned a few minutes ago, like practicum, where they're still a practicum student. It would count towards those 4 years only experience that would qualify for supervised professional experience under the board's rules and laws, 2914 specifically, the Business and Professions 2914.
Thank you, Dr. Winkleman and Pacheco, and thank you, Madam Moderator, for working with us in this discussion mode here, and we really appreciate the flexibility. Ms. Marks, does that answer your question?
Yes, I think that does answer my question and may also answer the question with respect to why staff recommended a watch position, because without wanting to sound unsympathetic toward the employees, this may have appeared to be more of an employment matter than, a matter for the board. In light of the discussion, that recommendation may change, but I'm just going to throw out that in addition to Ms. Stark's comments about it being cleanup, it may have appeared to be more of an employment issue.
Ms. Marks.
How the hours are calculated.
Ms. Marks, would your comments be reflective of where also the board's position was with regard to AB 5 and seeing that as a matter of employment and outside of the board's traditional bill?
I think that, I'm not. I can't really speak to what the staff may have been thinking. I'm just throwing out there that with that clarification, it may have been both sort of seen as cleanup and also potentially seen as more of a how the employer chooses to calculate that is not necessarily within the primary considerations of the board. That may not have been part of the thinking, but I was just offering that with that clarification that was given by Drs. Winkleman and Pacheco.
Thank you, Ms. Marks. Is there committee discussion on this item? Dr. Phillips?
Yeah, I was just going to say, certainly there's nothing here that I think we need to be concerned about relative to the psychology licensing laws. It doesn't alter our fundamental scheme. I guess the question really becomes whether this is a matter that we as the board, in the interest of consumer protection, should weigh in with due consideration for the concerns of our licensees and prospective licensees. I guess I'm feeling a little neutral on the whole thing, given that it's not really going to a consumer protection question.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Dr. Kasuga, any further comments on your end?
I feel the same way as Dr. Phillips. I'm sympathetic to what some of the cases that were, the examples that were presented by Dr. Pacheco, but I don't see it as much as a consumer protection mandate.
Understood, Dr. Kasuga. So I think what I'm going to suggest then moving forward is that we list this bill as an item on our watch list and it will be included on the board's agenda for July. And so if it's the pleasure of Dr. Pacheco, Dr. Winkleman, and any other public comments to raise this issue at that time, the board as a whole may view this discussion differently, but I'm not seeing and not hearing a motion on the table to advance this to the board with a recommendation. So I'm going to ask that staff list this item as a matter of the agenda for the July board meeting, and so that there could be continuing discussion on this from the public as well as the board as a whole.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. So we're going to go ahead then and turn to item, I believe, 14. This is AB 2360 related to telehealth. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. This bill would require healthcare service plans and health insurers by January 1, 2021 to establish a telehealth consultation program that provides providers who treat children and pregnant and postpartum persons with access to a psychiatrist as specified in order to more quickly diagnose and treat children and pregnant and postpartum persons suffering from mental illness. The bill would require the consultation to be done by telephone or telehealth video and would authorize the consultation to include guidance on providing triage services and referrals to evidence-based treatment options, including psychotherapy. The bill would require healthcare service plans and insurers to communicate information related to the health program at least twice a year in writing. The bill would require healthcare service plans and health insurers to maintain records and data pertaining to the utilization of the program and availability of psychiatrists in order to facilitate ongoing changes and improvements as necessary. The bill would exempt certain specialized healthcare service plans and health insurers from these provisions. Because a willful violation of the bill's requirements by a healthcare service plan would be a crime, the bill would impose a state-mandated local program. As of the 11th of June, the bill is now in the Senate Committee on Rules, so it, just like the other ones I've spoken to, have passed out of the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. Dr. Kasuga, I'll turn it over to you since you raised this bill as an item for discussion.
Just to clarify, Mr. Glasspiegel, this only pertains to psychiatrists and doesn't include psychologists. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Thank you.
Dr. Kasuga, did you wish for any further action on this bill, or Dr. Phillips, any further items or discussion items for this particular bill? Dr. Phillips?
Since this only applies to psychiatrists, I think we can leave it on the watch list.
All right. So I'm going to then ask Madam Moderator to go ahead and open up the Q&A panel for public comment, and that we ask that you please write in the box that you would like to make a comment if you have an item, if you would like to talk about this item.
Thank you. This is the moderator. I have opened the Q&A feature. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. And click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your WebEx screen and type in, I would like to make a public comment in the question box and send it to all panelists. Committee Chair, no requests were submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please, Madam Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. It has been closed.
All right. Seeing no further discussion from the committee and no public comment, we will go ahead and move to item 18. This item is Assembly Bill 2704 by Assembly Member Ting related to data collection. Mr. Glasspiegel?
Thank you. AB 2704, this bill would repeal the provisions stated earlier. It's a very long memo, but this bill would repeal specific provisions applicable to only licensees of boards, and instead would require all boards that oversee healing arts to collect data at the time of electronic application. Currently, the boards that have to do that are Physician Assistants Board, Registered Nursing, Respiratory Care Board, Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians have to collect this specified information, but it repeals that provision and makes it applicable to all healing arts licensees. And the data would have to be collected at the time of application or at least biennially with specific demographic information, and post the information on its website. On all of our individual websites. Bill would also require each board or the department on its behalf, beginning July 1, 2021, to provide the information annually to the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. The board would require these new boards to maintain the confidentiality of the information they receive from licensees and only release information in aggregate as specified. The bill has not moved since the May 18th date listed on the memo, and it is still referred to the Assembly Committee on Business and Professions.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. I had raised this item because I know in our discussions as a board, data collection has been really crucial and has been an important question for us and the limits of what data we can collect. I am raising this item here and asking that staff potentially identify what costs were shared with the Department of Consumer Affairs on the board's end if this bill was to be implemented, and also for a larger board discussion, cognizant that I know at least board member Cervantes has asked this question on several occasions. And so just wanted to raise this item here and make sure that at the board agenda, at the board meeting in July, the board as a whole can have a larger discussion on it. And I'm not comfortable asking or at least suggesting a motion in support of it until we see an analysis from staff, and would ask that staff also provide an additional analysis to this bill. Dr. Phillips?
Yeah, in terms of demographic information, it's not giving us a lot. I'm sure there must be expense attendant to this requirement in gathering additional information. But really, the race or ethnicity is optional. It's not required. And then we get gender and gender identity. So that would be the only information we would get is gender and gender identity. We don't get sexual orientation. We don't get disability. We don't get much meaningful in the way of demographic information as far as I can tell. So I don't think it really solves our problem of not having sufficient demographic information to be able to break things down when we want to by race or ethnicity or sexual orientation or whatever. It seems like the focus of the bill is really on other types of demographic information.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. I may be able to make this quite easy. I believe that this bill is quite possibly not moving any further. So I can do some research after this meeting into that, whether the bill will be moving anymore. And if it will be, then I can do some additional analyzing of the bill. But I believe after I've had communications with DCA, and they have indicated that the bill is not progressing.
That's helpful, Mr. Glasspiegel, for that information. I think just as I still would like to see this bill agendized for our July board meeting for a larger discussion. Absolutely. All the ones on the watch bill list right now will remain through July. There would be none removed from that list. Thank you. Is there? I'm seeing no further discussion from the committee. I'm going to go ahead and ask Madam Moderator to open up the Q&A panel for public comment.
This is the moderator. The Q&A panel has been opened. If you're interested, click on the Q&A icon at the bottom center of your WebEx screen and type in, "I would like to make a public comment" in the question box. Send it to all panelists, and we will call on you in the order that the comments are received. Committee Chair, no requests were submitted. Would you like us to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
So those were the bills that we identified and pulled for discussion. What I'm going to ask now is for the bills that first of all, if there are additional bills the committee would like to discuss, that we haven't. And Ms. Marks?
I just want to ask Dr. Winkleman if she has a comment, only because I see her little hand being raised, I think. And I want to make sure she isn't having an issue with typing in that she has a comment. Perhaps I'm not seeing that correctly, but it looks like her hand is raised.
Thanks, Ms. Marks. No, that was from a previous item. I don't have any comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marks and Dr. Winkleman. So I'm going to ask now then, we ask for public comment for any other of the watch bills under 7C. Madam Moderator, if you could activate the Q&A panel, and we're asking for public comment on any of the bills in item 7C.
This is the moderator. The Q&A panel has been activated. Again, if you would like to make a comment, just simply type in, I would like to make a public comment in the question box and send it to all panelists. I will pause for a moment to allow members of the public to access the feature. Committee Chair, no requests were submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Could we keep this feature open because item 8 is for legislative items for future meeting. The committee may discuss other items of legislation in sufficient detail to determine whether such items should be on a future committee or board meeting agenda, or whether to hold a special meeting of the committee or board to discuss such items pursuant to Government Code Section 11-125.4. So I would ask if for public comment if there are additional items, legislative items for future meetings. Alrighty, seeing no further items for item number 8 for public comment, I return it back to committee discussion. Are there any legislative items for future meetings that committee members or staff would like to raise? Seeing no comments from the public or from committee members and staff, we will take up item number 9 related to regulatory updates. We will begin with item 9A related to the standards of practice for telehealth. Mr. Glasspiegel.
Thank you. This agenda item is for the status of all current regulatory packages that the board has moving. The A, standards for practice for telehealth, the last update is that it was presented to agency for their review, which is the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, and they have to review all packages before they are noticed with the Office of Administrative Law.
Is there committee discussion from committee members on this item? All right, seeing none, Madam Moderator, could you open up the Q&A for this item?
This is the moderator. The Q&A is open. The instructions are on your screen, and simply type in, I would like to make a comment in the question box. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. It's been closed.
Mr. Glasspiegel, because items B through E are informational, perhaps I may ask you, if you're amenable to it, to present on all the items, and then we can, the board members can interject if they have any questions before moving on, and then we can also then call for public comment on all the items as well. Would that be amenable, Mr. Glasspiegel?
Yes.
All right, so let's go ahead and proceed then. If there aren't any objections from the board, from the committee members, with item B.
Okay. So all the regulatory packages we have are with the department. The psychological assistance regulatory package is in the initial review phase with the Department of Consumer Affairs. Retired license is also in the initial review phase with the Department of Consumer Affairs. Continuing professional development is now on the, I believe it to be on the director's desk for her review. And then inactive psychological assistance, we are waiting to move that regulatory package until the B, which is the psychological assistance regulatory package, moves, because there's changes that have to take place in that one before we move forward with the other one.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. Are there any questions from committee about the items B through E that Mr. Glasspiegel just presented?
No questions.
All right, hearing no questions. Mr. Glasspiegel, I do have a question before I turn over to public comment, and that is, could you talk a little bit about the continuing professional development item? And I think it's important in this moment in time that we're experiencing as we've been watching folks advocate for racial justice. Could you share what in the CPD related to social justice that might be of interest, certainly to me and perhaps to other board members?
I'm going to gently punt this next door to my colleague next door to me, Ms. Sorg.
Ms. Sorek, I think Mr. Glasspiegel gently punted this item over to you next door, he said, so.
And I was on mute saying something very prolific to my computer, I'm sure. Okay, so in our current continuing professional development regulatory package, which is going through the initial review phase, as Mr. Glasspiegel pointed to in his update, there is a requirement that all licensees, as a condition of renewal, license renewal, receive 4 hours of training for each renewal period pertinent to cultural diversity and or social justice issues as they apply to the practice of psychology in California. So I think maybe alluding to your introductory comment, Mr. Fu, this is certainly, I think, relevant and current now, and just speaks to the necessity of having that kind of provision in our current regulatory package.
Thank you, Mr. That's incredibly helpful. So, Madam Moderator, I'm going to ask that you activate the Q&A panel for public comment for items B through E as an elephant.
Fu, can I ask a question?
Oh, yes, please. Sorry, Dr. Kusuga, I didn't see your hand. And go ahead and speak while we wait for the public to also see if they have questions too.
Thank you, Mr. Fu. My question is with regards item C, the update on the standards of practice for telehealth. Given the needs of this moment in time, I'm just wondering if there's anything within our ability to move this regulation forward?
At this point, we have no control of the package while it moves through DCA's regulatory review process.
Dr. Kusuga, do you have a follow-up question?
No, that's what I thought. So I was just like wanting to really emphasize the need for directions with regards to the practice of telehealth, and given that that's the direction that the field is going, and there's a big need for it. So I just wanted to highlight that, and I hope that that this committee and the board as a whole would continue to always look at being able to meet the needs of whatever situation we are currently facing.
Thank you, Dr. Kusuga. And I'm also not seeing any public comment on items B through E under this section. So we can go ahead and close out the Q&A panel, Madam Moderator. So this then, seeing no further, excuse me, Dr. Kusuga, I see your hand is raised. Did you have further discussion items for this section? Oh, okay, never mind. I see you. All right, so we'll go ahead and move to item 10, which is recommendations for agenda items for future committee meetings. So as a note, the committee may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during the public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting per Government Code sections 11.125 and 11.125.7a. Committee members and staff, do we have additional items you would like to include for our next Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee meeting?
None here.
Thank you, Mr. Glasspiegel. And seeing no comments from or hands raised from committee members, I'm going to ask that the Madam Moderator, if you could go ahead, open up the Q&A panel to see if there's public comment on this item.
This is the moderator of Open the Q&A feature. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Simply type, I would like to make a public comment in the question box and send it to all panelists. I will pause for a moment. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. It has been closed.
So given that we've now moved through the entire agenda, I will ask for, actually before I do that, I'm gonna, Dr. Phillips, did you have a comment?
No, I was just looking forward to making a motion to adjourn.
Duly noted from Dr. Phillips. And before we do that, I just wanted to draw people's attention that on July 9th and 10th, the board as a whole will be convening for our July board meeting. It will be done also through WebEx, so through this platform here today. And so wanted to just bring people's attention to that. The materials will be posted for that as we get closer to the deadline. Excuse me, as we get closer to the board meeting. But you can, once that's posted, if you are subscribed to the board's listserv, you'll get a notification for that. So with that, I think we have a motion from Dr. Kusuga.
I just wanted to acknowledge the participation of the public and the efforts of the board staff as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kasuga, and I echo the sentiment. I love this is our first Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee that has had such extensive public participation, and I'm certainly energized by it. And I also really want to take the time to acknowledge and thank the solid staff for facilitating today's discussion and for helping us navigate this platform. I know it takes some getting used to, and so I really appreciate both board staff and solid staff in getting us through today and into our next board meeting. Dr. Kasuga, I see your hand up, so I'll turn it over to you real quickly.
And I also wanted to thank you for facilitating this meeting.
Oh gosh, thank you. That's very gracious. I really appreciate it, Dr. Kasuga. And so Dr. Phillips has been waiting in the wings with his motion to adjourn, which the chair will entertain, and the assumption, and I understand you don't need a second. So without objection,
I still second it.
It's been moved and seconded, and without objection, the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee is adjourned. With our thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Dr. Phillips.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.